The white dress felt heavy against Maria Santos's skin as she opened her eyes to burning sand and endless blue sky. Her mouth tasted like copper and dust. The ceremonial robes that had once been pure white were now torn and stained with blood that she hoped was not all hers. Pain shot through her left shoulder as she tried to sit up. Maria remembered the cold metal walls of the Zephyrian ship. She remembered the alien faces looking down at her with their large black eyes and gray skin that seemed to shimmer in the strange light. Most of all, she remembered the moment when everything went wrong. The United Earth Council had chosen her for this mission 3 months ago. Captain Maria Santos, decorated pilot, unmarried, no children, perfect military record. They needed someone pure to offer to the Zephyrian War Prince Kethmar. The aliens had demanded a bride as proof that Earth would submit to their rule. It was either give them what they wanted, or watch their biomechanical ships turn every human city to ash. Maria had agreed to the mission because she knew what would happen if she said no. The Zephyrian Empire controlled half the galaxy. Their ships could destroy planets. Earth had nothing that could stop them. One life for 7 billion lives seemed like a fair trade. The ceremony had taken place on their mothership high above Earth. Maria wore the white dress that symbolized her purity. The alien prince stood before her, tall and thin, his skin the color of old metal. When he reached out to touch her forehead with his long fingers, something had gone wrong. The scanning device on his hand had started making harsh sounds. The other alien stepped back as if she carried some disease. The prince's black eyes grew wide with what might have been fear or anger. He spoke to the others in their clicking language before turning back to her. "You are tainted," he had said in perfect English. "Your body carries the marks of war machines. You are not pure. This offering is worthless." The next thing Maria knew, she was falling through Earth's atmosphere in an escape pod. She remembered the heat and the spinning and the terrible moment when she realized they were not taking her to a safe landing zone. They were dropping her in the middle of nowhere to die. Now she sat in sand that burned even through her torn dress. The desert stretched in every direction with no sign of water or shelter. The sun hung like an angry eye in the sky, already making her skin feel tight and hot. She had military training that included survival skills, but surviving in a desert with no supplies was almost impossible. Maria tried to remember what she knew about desert survival. Find shade during the day. Travel at night when it was cooler. Look for signs of water like green plants or animal tracks. Most important, try not to panic because panic made you use energy faster. She looked around for anything that might help her live longer. The escape pod had burned up completely during the landing, leaving only a small crater in the sand. Her white dress would at least reflect some of the sun's heat, but it would not protect her for long. She had no food, no water, and no way to signal for help. The worst part was knowing that Earth was still in danger. The aliens had rejected her offering, which meant they would probably attack anyway. All of this suffering would be for nothing. The people she loved, the planet she had sworn to protect, would burn while she died slowly in this wasteland. Maria forced herself to stand up despite the pain in her shoulder. She could not just sit here and wait to die. Maybe she could find water, or maybe someone would find her. She had to try. She started walking in what she hoped was the right direction, though she had no way to know which way was right. The sand shifted under her feet with each step, making walking hard work. The sun beat down on her head and shoulders. Already she could feel sweat starting to form on her skin, precious water that her body would lose too quickly in this heat. As she walked, Maria thought about her life. She had always wanted to be a pilot, ever since she was a little girl watching planes fly over her home in California. Her parents had been proud when she joined the military. They had been even more proud when she became one of the youngest captains in the Space Force. She thought about her last conversation with her mother before the mission. Her mother had cried and begged her not to go. There has to be another way, she had said. But there was no other way, and they both knew it. The sand dunes seemed to go on forever. Maria's legs already felt weak and shaky. Her throat burned with thirst. She tried not to think about how much water the human body needed to survive, or how long a person could live without it in heat like this. After what felt like hours of walking, Maria saw something that made her heart jump. In the distance, she could see what looked like rocks or maybe even buildings. It was probably just another sand dune or her mind playing tricks on her, but it gave her something to walk toward. The white dress caught on thorny plants that grew up from the sand in scattered patches. Some of them had small flowers, which meant they could find water somewhere underground. But Maria did not know how to dig for water with her bare hands, and she did not have the strength to try. Vultures started following her after the first few hours. They flew in lazy circles overhead, waiting for her to fall down and stop moving. Maria knew what they were waiting for, but she refused to give them the satisfaction. She would keep walking until her body could not walk anymore. The sun moved slowly across the sky as Maria put one foot in front of the other. Her skin felt like it was on fire. Her lips were already starting to crack, but she did not stop walking because stopping meant giving up. And giving up meant that Earth would burn without anyone even trying to save it. As the day wore on, Maria began to understand that she was probably going to die in this desert. The thought should have scared her, but instead it made her angry. She had tried to save her world and the aliens had thrown her away like garbage. Now Earth would face the Zephyrian fleet alone while she became food for desert scavengers. But anger gave her strength to keep walking, even as the sun began to set and the desert started to grow cold around her. Billy Yazzie walked through the desert morning with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, and his grandmother's words still echoing in his head. "The spirits send what we need when we need it most," she had told him before he left the house. "Keep your eyes open today, grandson. Something important is coming." Billy had learned not to ignore his grandmother's feelings about things. Helen Yazzie had been right too many times for him to dismiss her warnings or predictions. Still, he had not expected to find anything more interesting than the medicinal plants she had sent him to gather. The summer break from MIT felt strange after months of studying engineering, in concrete buildings and sleeping in a dorm room. Being back on the reservation reminded Billy of how different his two worlds were. At school, people saw him as just another smart kid who was good with computers and math. Here, he was the grandson of one of the most respected medicine women in the tribe. Billy walked toward the sacred spring that his family had been visiting for generations. The path was not marked on any map, but he could have found it with his eyes closed. His feet knew every rock and turn from childhood trips with his grandmother and grandfather. As he got closer to the spring, Billy saw something that did not belong. A flash of white fabric caught his eye near the water's edge. At first he thought it might be trash that someone had left behind, but as he got closer he realized it was a person. A woman lay crumpled beside the spring, wearing what looked like a torn wedding dress. Her dark hair was tangled with sand and dried blood. Her skin was burned red from the sun and her lips were cracked from thirst. But she was breathing, which meant she was still alive. Billy dropped his gathering bag and ran to the woman's side. She was unconscious, but her pulse felt steady under his fingers. He could see that she had been in the desert for at least a day, maybe longer. Without water and shelter, she would have died soon. The woman's dress was like nothing Billy had ever seen. The fabric felt strange under his hands, almost like it was made from some kind of advanced material that only looked like silk. There were symbols sewn into the cloth that he did not recognize, but they reminded him of the star charts his grandfather used to draw. Billy lifted the woman as carefully as he could and carried her to his truck. She was lighter than he expected, but he could feel how dehydrated she was. Her body felt hot with fever and her breathing was shallow. He needed to get her to help quickly. As he drove back toward his family's home, the woman started to wake up. She mumbled words in what sounded like Spanish mixed with something else he could not identify. Her eyes opened and she stared at him with a confused expression. "Where am I?" she asked in English with a slight accent. "You're safe," Billy told her. "I found you by the spring. My grandmother will know how to help you." The woman tried to sit up but fell back against the truck seat with a groan. "The desert," she said. "I was walking in the desert." "Don't try to talk right now," Billy said. "Save your strength." But the woman grabbed his arm with surprising force. "Did God send you to us?" she asked, her voice desperate and strange. Billy felt a chill run down his spine. Those words sounded like something from one of his grandmother's visions. He had heard her speak about visitors who would come when the people needed them most. "What's your name?" he asked instead of answering her question. "Maria," she said. "Maria Santos. I'm a captain in the Earth Space Force." Billy almost laughed because he thought she was talking crazy from the heat, but something in her eyes stopped him. She looked completely serious, and there was a kind of knowledge there that did not match someone who was just confused from dehydration. "Earth Space Force?" he asked. Maria closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. "You probably think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But if I'm not crazy, then your planet is in terrible danger, and I'm the only one who knows about it. Billy did not know what to think. The woman clearly needed medical attention, but she did not sound like someone who was just talking nonsense. There was something about her that reminded him of his grandmother when she talked about serious spiritual matters. They reached the family's home just as Helen Yazzie came out of the house. Billy's grandmother took one look at Maria and immediately started giving orders in Navajo. She sent Billy's younger sister running for medical supplies while she helped carry Maria. Inside, Helen's hands moved over Maria's body with the skill of someone who had been healing people for 50 years. She checked for broken bones and signs of serious injury, while muttering prayers in their traditional language. Her touch seemed to calm Maria, who had been restless and worried since waking up. "This woman has been through something terrible," Helen said to Billy in English. "But her injuries are not just from the desert. Someone hurt her before she got lost." Billy watched his grandmother work and remembered all the times she had healed people when the regular doctors could not help them. Helen Yazzie knew things about the human body and spirit that medical school did not teach. While his grandmother cleaned Maria's wounds and gave her small sips of water mixed with traditional herbs, Billy called the tribal medical center. But something made him not mention Maria's strange claims about being in the Space Force. His grandmother always said to listen before judging, especially when someone brought an unusual story. Maria slept for most of the day while Helen kept watch over her. Billy tried to study for his summer engineering project, but he kept thinking about the woman's words. "Did God send you to us? What did that mean? And why did it feel so important?" That evening, when Maria was strong enough to sit up and eat some soup, she looked around the room with wonder. "This place feels safe," she said. "I haven't felt safe in months." "You are safe here," Helen said. "My grandson found you by the sacred spring. That is not an accident." Maria stared at the old woman with surprise. "You believe me about being from the Space Force?" "I believe that you came from the sky," Helen said calmly. "I have been dreaming about sky people for weeks. The spirits told me someone would come who needed our help." Billy felt his two worlds colliding in a way that made his head spin. His MIT education told him that what his grandmother was saying was impossible. But his heart knew that Helen Yazzie had never been wrong about the important things. "Tell us what happened to you," Helen said to Maria. "Tell us why you fell from the sky." Maria sat up straighter in the bed and looked at the faces around her. Billy's grandmother Helen had kind eyes that seemed to see more than most people. Billy himself looked like he was trying to decide if she was telling the truth, or if the desert heat had damaged her mind. His younger sister Katie sat in the corner, pretending to read but clearly listening to every word. "Before I tell you what happened," Maria said slowly, "I need you to understand that everything I'm about to say will sound impossible. But it's all true, and if I'm right, then Earth has maybe 2 weeks before alien ships start destroying our cities." Billy opened his mouth to speak, but his grandmother held up her hand for silence. "Let her talk," Helen said. "We will listen first and judge later." Maria took a deep breath and began her story. She told them about the Zephyrian Empire, a race of beings who controlled hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. She explained how their biomechanical ships had appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system 6 months ago, with a simple message: submit or be destroyed. "The United Earth Council tried everything," Maria continued. "We sent diplomats, we offered trade agreements, we even tried to fight them with our best warships. Nothing worked. Their technology is thousands of years ahead of ours. One of their ships destroyed our entire Mars defense fleet in less than an hour." Billy was shaking his head. "This sounds like a science fiction movie." "I know how it sounds," Maria said. "But I was there. I saw our ships burning in space. I watched good people die because we had nothing that could hurt the Zephyrians." Helen leaned forward in her chair. "What did they want from Earth?" "They wanted to make an example of us," Maria answered. "The Zephyrians rule through fear. When they conquer a new species, they make sure everyone in the galaxy knows about it. But they have traditions about how conquest works. If a species offers them the right kind of tribute, they might allow some humans to live as slaves instead of killing everyone." Maria's voice got quieter as she continued. "They demanded a virgin bride for their war prince. Someone pure and unmarried to prove that Earth was willing to surrender completely. The council chose me because I fit their requirements and because I volunteered." "You volunteered to marry an alien?" Katie asked from her corner. "I volunteered to save the human race," Maria corrected. "It seemed like a fair trade. My life for 7 billion lives." Billy was staring at her with a mixture of disbelief and growing concern. "So what went wrong?" Maria touched her left shoulder where Billy could see the edge of a strange scar. I have military implants, computer chips that help pilots interface with advanced spacecraft. The Zephyrians didn't know about them when they accepted the Council's offer. When their scanning device touched me during the ceremony, it detected the implants and marked me as contaminated. They rejected you because you had computer parts in your body? Helen asked. The Zephyrians have very strict ideas about purity, Maria explained. They see any kind of artificial enhancement as corruption. The War Prince called me tainted and worthless. They dumped me in the desert and told the Council that Earth's offering was unacceptable. The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed this information. Billy got up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful desert landscape. It was hard to imagine alien warships hanging in space above them, ready to rain down destruction. Even if your story is true, Billy said without turning around, what can we do about it? If these aliens are as powerful as you say, then we're all dead anyway. That's what I thought too, Maria said. But since I've been here, I've started to notice things that don't make sense. Helen raised an eyebrow. What kind of things? Maria pointed to the ceiling, where Billy could see what looked like normal light fixtures. Those aren't regular electric lights. The spectrum is slightly off. And the computer in your truck, Billy, it's running software that's at least 10 years ahead of anything I've seen in the military. Billy turned back to face her, his expression suddenly guarded. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Maria said gently. Your grandmother knew I was coming before Billy found me. You have technology here that shouldn't exist, and when I asked if God sent me to you, Billy, you looked like you'd heard those words before. Helen and Billy exchanged a long look that spoke of shared secrets. Finally, the old woman sighed and nodded to her grandson. Show her, Helen said. Billy hesitated for another moment, then walked to what Maria had thought was a decorative wall hanging. When he touched a specific spot in the woven pattern, part of the wall slid aside to reveal a room filled with equipment that definitely did not belong in a traditional Navajo home. Maria stared at screens showing star charts and data streams that looked familiar. There were devices she could not identify, but they hummed with the kind of energy that usually meant advanced technology. In the center of the room sat something that looked like a cross between a computer and a musical instrument. What is all this? Maria asked. Our early warning system, Billy said. We've been tracking the Zephyrian fleet for 3 weeks. Maria felt her world shift again. How is that possible? Earth's best telescopes couldn't detect them until they were already in the solar system. Because we're not using telescopes, Helen said, standing up and walking into the hidden room. We're using something much older and much more powerful. The old woman sat down at the strange device in the center of the room and placed her hands on what looked like a traditional drumhead. As she began to tap out a rhythm, the screens around the room came alive with images and data. We call it quantum listening, Billy explained. It's based on traditional Navajo understanding of how all things are connected, combined with some very advanced physics. We can hear the songs that stars sing to each other. We can feel the vibrations that big ships make when they move through space. Maria watched in amazement as the screens showed her the Zephyrian fleet in perfect detail. She could see their biomechanical ships arranged in attack formation, waiting for the order to begin Earth's destruction. How long have you had this technology? She asked. Generations, Helen answered, her hand still moving in complex patterns on the drum. My grandmother's grandmother had the first visions of what was coming. We have been preparing for this day for a very long time. Billy pulled up more screens showing research data and technical specifications. The reservation has been developing advanced technology for decades. We just kept it hidden because we knew that if the outside world found out, they would try to take it away from us. But why? Maria asked. Why keep it secret when it could help everyone? Helen stopped drumming and looked at Maria with sad eyes. Because the outside world has a long history of taking everything good that indigenous people create and using it to hurt us. We decided long ago that we would only share our gifts when the time was right. And now? Maria asked. Now the star people have come with fire to burn the world, Helen said, repeating words that sounded like prophecy. The Earth children who remember the old ways must stand between destruction and salvation. Billy activated another screen that showed a global map dotted with small lights. We're not the only ones who have been preparing. Indigenous communities all over the world have been developing their own versions of advanced technology. We've been in contact with them through quantum communication networks that the mainstream world doesn't even know exist, Maria stared at the map in wonder. There were lights in Australia, New Zealand, northern Canada, the Amazon basin, and dozens of other locations. You have a global network. We have something better than a network, Helen said with a smile that looked almost fierce. We have family, and family protects family, no matter how big the threat. For the first time since being rejected by the Zephyrians, Maria felt something that might have been hope. Helen Yazzie led Maria and Billy deeper into the hidden chambers beneath their home. The walls were covered with what looked like traditional sand paintings, but as they got closer, Maria could see that the colored sand was actually some kind of crystalline material that pulsed with soft light. My great-grandmother spoke of this day many times, Helen said as they walked. She said that when the Star People came with fire to burn the world, the Earth children who remember the old ways would stand between destruction and salvation. Maria studied the glowing patterns on the walls. They reminded her of circuit diagrams, but they moved and shifted like living things. These aren't just decorations, are they? Nothing in our culture is just decoration, Billy said with a slight smile. Every pattern has meaning. Every design serves a purpose. They entered a circular room where several dozen people sat in a circle around a large drum covered with the same crystalline material Maria had seen on the walls. She recognized some faces from the tribal medical center, but others were strangers. What surprised her most was that many of them were young people like Billy. An elderly man with silver hair and weathered hands stood up as they entered. You must be the Sky Woman that Helen has been dreaming about, he said. I am Joseph Begay, chairman of the tribal council. Maria shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. I'm Captain Maria Santos. Your people have been very kind to me. Kindness is not why we brought you here, Joseph said, but his tone was gentle. We brought you here because you carry information we need, and because we have something that might save your people. Helen guided Maria to sit between herself and Billy, while Joseph returned to his place in the circle. As soon as everyone was seated, the old woman began to drum. The rhythm was complex and hypnotic, but Maria noticed that it was also creating vibrations in the crystalline material around the room. For over a century, our people have been working to understand the old stories in new ways, Joseph began. Our ancestors spoke of songs that could move mountains and dances that could call rain. The white world dismissed these as superstition, but we knew they were descriptions of real phenomena. Billy leaned over to whisper to Maria. When I was studying quantum physics at MIT, I started to realize that a lot of traditional Navajo teachings were actually advanced scientific concepts described in different language. The universe is made of vibrations, Helen continued, her hands never stopping their complex rhythm on the drum. Every atom, every molecule, every living thing sings its own song. When you know how to listen to those songs and how to join your voice to theirs, you can influence the harmony of creation itself. As Helen spoke, the patterns on the walls began to move faster. Maria could see data flowing through the crystalline networks like blood through veins. The entire room was functioning as some kind of massive computer system. Traditional sand paintings are actually programming languages, a young woman across the circle explained. Each color, each symbol, each geometric pattern represents different quantum frequencies. When we create a painting in the right sequence, we're essentially writing code that interacts with the fundamental forces of reality. Maria tried to wrap her mind around what she was seeing. You're telling me that your ancestors were quantum physicists? We're telling you that quantum physics is just the white world's way of rediscovering what indigenous people have always known, Joseph said. The difference is that we never separated science from spirituality. We understand that you cannot manipulate the physical world without understanding your place in the web of all existence. Another council member activated a section of the wall that revealed a workshop filled with devices Maria could not begin to identify. Some looked like traditional musical instruments crossed with advanced electronics. Others resembled dream catchers but were clearly made from materials that had never grown on any tree. Show her the harmonic disruptors, Billy suggested. An older woman brought out what looked like a flute made from some kind of metal that seemed to shift color in the light. When she played a single note, every piece of electronic equipment in the room briefly flickered. Biomechanical technology requires perfect harmony between organic and artificial components, the woman explained. The Zephyrian ships are essentially giant living beings with computer systems grafted onto their nervous systems. If you disrupt that harmony with the right frequency patterns, The organic and mechanical parts start fighting each other instead of working together. Maria stared at the instrument in amazement. That little flute could disable a Zephyrian warship? This little flute could disable their entire fleet if we could get it close enough, Billy said. But we have something better than that. Joseph gestured to the patterns covering the walls around them. Every sand painting in this room is connected to similar installations all over the world. When we activate them all at the same time, we can create a planet-wide frequency net that will reach every ship in orbit. But first we need to understand exactly how their technology works, Helen said, looking directly at Maria. That's where you come in. Maria thought about her time on the Zephyrian ship, trying to remember every detail about their equipment and procedures. I was only on their ship for a few hours, and most of that time I was focused on the ceremony. Tell us what you remember, Billy encouraged. Everything might be important. Maria closed her eyes and tried to recall the alien vessel. The walls felt warm, like they were alive. I could hear something that sounded like a heartbeat coming from the floor. The air tasted strange, kind of metallic but also organic. Living ship, several council members said at the same time. The scanning device that the war prince used on me, Maria continued. It looked like jewelry, but when he touched my forehead with it, I could feel it reading my thoughts. It was looking for something specific in my mind, not just checking my body. Helen stopped drumming and leaned forward with interest. What kind of thoughts was it reading? Memories of violence, I think, Maria said slowly. It seemed upset when it detected my military training and my combat experience. Like those memories were contaminating my purity. Billy was typing rapidly on a device that looked like a traditional loom, but was clearly some kind of computer interface. That matches what we've learned about Zephyrian psychology. They see any kind of conflict or aggression as a spiritual disease, which means they probably have no defense against harmonious aggression, Joseph observed. Maria looked confused. What's harmonious aggression? War that serves the balance of life instead of destroying it, Helen explained. Fighting to protect rather than to conquer. Using force to heal rather than to harm. The old warriors understood this, another elder added. When our people fought, it was to protect the land and the children. We never fought for glory or wealth or power. That's why our weapons were blessed and our battles were ceremonies. Billy looked up from his loom computer. I'm getting responses from our sister communities. The Aboriginal Australians have been tracking Zephyrian communication frequencies. The Maori in New Zealand have developed acoustic weapons based on traditional war chants. The Inuit have been working on atmospheric manipulation techniques. How is this possible? Maria asked. How have indigenous communities around the world developed advanced technology without anyone knowing about it? Because the dominant culture stopped paying attention to us decades ago, Joseph said with a bitter smile. As long as we stayed on our reservations and kept quiet, the outside world was happy to pretend we didn't exist. That gave us the freedom to work without interference. Helen picked up her drumming again, and Maria could feel the vibrations in her bones. While the white world was busy conquering and consuming, we were busy learning and preparing. We knew this day would come because the old stories told us it would come. Every indigenous culture has prophecies about the time when sky people would come to test humanity, Billy added. We've been comparing notes for generations, and the stories all point to the same conclusion. The people who remember how to live in harmony with the natural world would be the ones to save it. Maria looked around the circle at faces that showed determination instead of fear. These people were not just hoping to survive the Zephyrian attack. They were planning to win. What do you need me to do? She asked. Helen smiled, and her drumming took on a different rhythm, one that sounded almost like a heartbeat. Help us turn their own technology against them. Help us show the galaxy that the strongest species is not the one that conquers everything, but the one that protects everything. Maria felt something inside her chest respond to the drum rhythm, as if her own heart was trying to match the ancient pattern. For the first time since volunteering for the marriage mission, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Maria spent the next 3 days learning about technology that challenged everything she thought she knew about science. Billy took her through workshops where traditional weavers created fabric that could bend light around itself, making the wearer nearly invisible. Silversmiths forged metal that could store and redirect electromagnetic energy in ways that defied conventional physics. How long have your people been developing this technology? Maria asked as she watched an elderly man carve symbols into what looked like ordinary turquoise but generated its own electrical field. That depends on how you define technology, Billy replied. If you mean devices that look like what the outside world expects, maybe 30 years. But if you mean understanding and manipulating natural forces, then thousands of years. They were standing in a workshop where a young woman named Lisa Begay was assembling what she called a harmonic amplifier. It looked like a dream catcher made from metal threads and crystals, but when she activated it, Maria could feel vibrations that seemed to reach into her very DNA. Traditional healing songs don't just make people feel better, Lisa explained as she worked. They actually restructure cellular damage at the quantum level. Once we figured out how to measure and record those frequencies, we could build devices that did the same thing. Maria watched Lisa's hands move with practiced skill. So you can heal people with sound? We can do a lot more than heal people, Billy said. We can disrupt any system that depends on biological and mechanical components working together. Like Zephyrian technology. Joseph Begay appeared in the workshop doorway. Maria, we need you in the communication center. We're receiving messages from the Zephyrian fleet. They hurried through passages that Maria was beginning to realize formed a vast underground complex. The reservation that looked poor and struggling from the surface was actually a sophisticated research facility that had been hidden for decades. The communication center was filled with equipment that combined traditional designs with advanced electronics. Helen sat at the central console, her hands moving over controls that looked like they had been carved from wood but functioned like the most advanced computers Maria had ever seen, the Zephyrian. War Prince is demanding that Earth produce a new offering, Helen reported without looking up from her work. He's giving the United Earth Council 48 hours to find an acceptable bride. Maria felt her stomach drop. They're going to choose someone else. No, Joseph said firmly. We're not going to let that happen. Billy activated another console that showed a global map covered with moving lights. Our sister communities are ready to begin the first phase of the operation. Aboriginal elders in Australia have been preparing acoustic disruption patterns. Maori warriors in New Zealand have modified their traditional war chants to interfere with biomechanical neural networks. The Inuit in northern Canada have been working with atmospheric manipulation, Lisa added as she entered the room carrying her completed harmonic amplifier. They can create electromagnetic storms that will confuse Zephyrian navigation systems. Maria stared at the map in amazement. You're coordinating a global defense network. We're coordinating a global family, Helen corrected. Indigenous peoples worldwide have been in contact for much longer than the colonizers realize. We've been sharing knowledge and preparing for threats that the dominant culture couldn't see coming. Another screen activated to show the face of a woman with traditional Maori tattoos. Kia ora, cousins, she said in accented English. The waka are ready to sail. Our Taiaha warriors have been practicing the new haka that will make the sky demons weep. Billy leaned over to explain to Maria. She's talking about their acoustic weapons. Traditional Maori war chants have been modified to generate frequencies that disrupt biomechanical interfaces. More faces appeared on other screens. An Aboriginal elder from Australia reported that his people had finished carving songlines into crystalline matrices that could broadcast disruption patterns across entire continents. An Inuit woman from the Arctic confirmed that weatherworking ceremonies were ready to create electromagnetic chaos in Earth's upper atmosphere. How is this communication network possible? Maria asked. You're talking to people on the other side of the planet in real time. Quantum entanglement through natural crystal networks, Billy explained. Indigenous peoples around the world have been building communication systems based on the understanding that all matter is connected at the quantum level. We can send information instantly through crystal matrices that are synchronized with each other. Helen turned away from her console to face Maria. The Zephyrians made a mistake when they rejected you. They assumed that humans are like them, that we value individual purity over collective strength. They don't understand that our greatest power comes from working together. But we need to know more about their weaknesses, Joseph said. Maria, you were on their ship. You felt how their technology works. We need you to help us target our attacks precisely. Maria closed her eyes and tried to remember every detail of her time on the Zephyrian vessel. Their entire ship felt alive, but in a way that seemed forced. Like the organic and mechanical parts were being held together by willpower rather than natural growth. That matches our analysis, Billy said, pulling up technical diagrams on his console. Biomechanical fusion is incredibly difficult to maintain. It requires constant energy to keep the organic and artificial components from rejecting each other. The war prince seemed nervous during the ceremony, Maria continued. He kept checking readings on his scanning device like he was worried about something going wrong. And when the device rejected me, he looked almost relieved. Helen leaned forward with interest. Relieved? Like he had been expecting problems, Maria clarified. Maybe their technology isn't as stable as they want us to think. Lisa activated her harmonic amplifier and aimed it at a piece of equipment that Billy identified as a biomechanical interface they had captured from a Zephyrian probe. The device immediately began showing signs of stress, with organic components trying to separate from mechanical ones. Their technology fights against itself when exposed to harmonious frequencies, Lisa observed. It's like their organic and mechanical parts want to be free of each other. Because biomechanical fusion is inherently unnatural, Helen said. It violates the basic principle that all things should exist in harmony with their true nature. Billy was typing rapidly on his console. If we can create a planet-wide harmonic field that encourages their technology to return to its natural state, we might be able to disable their entire fleet without destroying it. Non-violent warfare, Joseph said with approval. We fight them by healing them. Maria felt a strange excitement building in her chest. You're not planning to destroy the Zephyrian ships. You're planning to cure them. Exactly, Helen said with a smile that looked almost motherly. The Zephyrians have been using forced fusion technology for so long that they've forgotten what natural harmony feels like. When we remind their ships how to exist in balance, the organic and mechanical components will separate peacefully. And then, what happens to the Zephyrians? Maria asked. Then they'll have to learn a new way of living, Billy said. One that doesn't depend on forcing different types of life to work against their nature. The screens around the room continued to show indigenous communities around the world making final preparations for what they were calling the Great Healing. Traditional ceremonies were being combined with advanced technology to create weapons that fought by restoring balance rather than destroying enemies. How long before you can be ready? Maria asked. We've been ready for generations, Joseph said. The question is whether the Zephyrians are ready to learn that the strongest force in the universe isn't conquest or domination. Helen returned to her drumming, and Maria could feel the vibrations spreading through the underground complex. Similar drums were beating in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and dozens of other locations around the world. The planet itself was beginning to sing a song of healing that would soon reach into space. What can I do to help? Maria asked. Help us show them what real strength looks like, Helen said. Help us prove that the people they dismissed as primitives are actually the most advanced beings they've ever encountered. Maria looked around the room at faces that showed determination, wisdom, and something that might have been compassion for their enemies. These people were not fighting to win. They were fighting to heal a galaxy that had forgotten what harmony meant. The next morning brought news that made Maria's blood run cold. Billy burst into the chamber where she was learning to operate Navajo quantum communication equipment with a expression of urgent concern on his face. The United Earth Council found a replacement bride, he announced. They're planning to send a 16-year-old girl from one of the lunar colonies, someone who has never had any kind of medical implants or military training. Maria felt sick to her stomach. They can't sacrifice a child. They can and they will, Joseph said grimly as he entered the room behind Billy. The council is desperate. They think that if they give the Zephyrians what they want, maybe the aliens will only enslave humanity instead of wiping us out completely. Helen looked up from the communication console where she had been coordinating with indigenous communities around the world. How long before they send her? 18 hours, Billy replied. The ceremony is scheduled to take place on the Zephyrian mothership at dawn tomorrow. Maria started toward the exit. I have to contact the council. I have to tell them about your technology and convince them to wait. They won't listen, Joseph said, blocking her path. The outside world has never listened to indigenous peoples when we try to tell them about dangers or solutions. Why would they start now? Because this time we can prove what we're saying, Maria argued. Helen shook her head sadly. Even if they believed us, they would want to take our technology and use it their own way. They would turn our healing tools into weapons of destruction and make everything worse. Billy activated a screen that showed news feeds from around the world. Every major government was praising the brave young volunteer who would save humanity through her sacrifice. None of them mentioned that she was still a child who should be in school instead of facing an alien marriage ceremony. This is exactly what the prophecies warned about, Helen continued. The Star People would come when the dominant culture had lost its way so completely that it would sacrifice its own children instead of learning from the Earth children who still remembered the old. Wait, so what do we do? Maria asked. We save her, Joseph said simply, and we save everyone else at the same time. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as the Global Indigenous Network accelerated their preparations. Maria watched in amazement as traditional ceremonies from around the world began incorporating advanced technology that had been hidden for decades. On the main communication screen, she could see Aboriginal elders in Australia activating crystal matrices that had been carved with song lines describing the correct frequencies for biomechanical disruption. The patterns glowed with their own light as they began broadcasting harmonic interference across the continent. The Aboriginal peoples have the oldest continuous culture on Earth, Billy explained as they watched. They've been working with quantum frequencies for over 60,000 years. They just didn't have electronic amplifiers until recently. Another screen showed Maori warriors in New Zealand performing a haka that incorporated sonic weapons disguised as traditional instruments. Their war dance was actually a precise ritual for generating acoustic patterns that could interfere with alien neural networks. Traditional Maori warfare was always about more than physical conflict, Lisa Bege said as she made final adjustments to her harmonic amplifiers. They understood that true victory comes from changing the spiritual balance of a situation, not just defeating enemies. In the Arctic, Inuit elders were performing weatherworking ceremonies that combined traditional knowledge of atmospheric patterns with advanced electromagnetic manipulation. Storm clouds were gathering over the northern polar regions, but Maria could see that these were not natural storms. The Inuit have always been master weather workers, Helen explained. They had to be to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Now they're using those skills to create electromagnetic chaos that will confuse Zephyrian navigation systems. Similar preparations were taking place in the Amazon rainforest, where indigenous peoples had developed biotechnology that worked with living plants instead of against them. In the Andes Mountains, Quechua communities were activating stone circles that focused telluric energy into precise frequencies. How many indigenous communities are part of this network? Maria asked. All of them, Joseph answered. Every indigenous culture that has survived colonization has been preparing for this day in their own way. We've been sharing knowledge and coordinating plans for generations. Billy showed her a map that revealed the true scope of the global network. There were active nodes on every continent in every climate, among peoples that the outside world barely acknowledged still existed. The map looked like a vast nervous system spanning the entire planet. The colonizers never understood what they were seeing when they encountered indigenous cultures, Helen said. They thought we were primitive because we didn't build cities or factories. They didn't realize that we were building something much more sophisticated, a living network that could respond to threats and opportunities on a global scale. As the hours passed, Maria began to understand that what she was witnessing was not just a military operation. It was the activation of a planetary defense system that had been growing and evolving for centuries, hidden beneath the surface of history that most people knew. The Zephyrians chose to attack Earth because they thought we were a young species with primitive technology, Billy observed as he monitored communications from around the world. They didn't realize that some human cultures are older than their entire empire. The communication channels were filled with reports in dozens of languages that Maria didn't recognize. But the translation systems built into the Navajo equipment converted everything into English for her benefit. Communities that had been forced to hide their knowledge for generations were finally able to work together openly. It's not just about the technology, Helen said as she prepared for the final phase of the operation. It's about remembering who we really are as human beings. The Zephyrians see us as primitive because the dominant culture has become disconnected from the natural world. But indigenous peoples never lost that connection. Maria watched preparation ceremonies that combined ancient rituals with advanced science in ways that challenged her understanding of both. Medicine wheels became quantum computers. Traditional songs became electromagnetic broadcasts. Sacred dances became programming languages for reality itself. "Are you really going to be able to stop an entire alien fleet with this?" she asked. "We're not going to stop them," Joseph corrected. "We're going to heal them." The Zephyrians have been using unnatural technology for so long that they've forgotten what harmony feels like. When we remind them, their own ships will refuse to fight. And if that doesn't work? Helen smiled with the confidence of someone who had never doubted the power of the old ways. "Then we'll show the galaxy that the Earth children are not as helpless as we appear. We'll prove that the strongest force in the universe is not domination or conquest, but the kind of love that protects life itself." As the sun began to set, Maria realized that tomorrow would bring either humanity's greatest defeat or its most unexpected victory. Either way, the world would never be the same again. The hidden strength of Earth's indigenous peoples was about to reveal itself to the galaxy, and nothing would ever be able to hide it again. The Zephyrian mothership hung in space like a metallic tumor against the starfield, its biomechanical hull pulsing with sickly light. War Prince Kethmar stood on the ceremonial platform, watching as his subordinates prepared the ritual chamber for the new human offering. The Earth Council had delivered exactly what he demanded: a young female with no military training, no technological implants, and no history of violence. The girl stood trembling in her white ceremonial robes, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the alien beings surrounding her. "This one is acceptable," Kethmar announced after his scanning device confirmed her purity. "The humans have learned to provide proper tribute." But as he reached out to touch the girl's forehead and complete the bonding ceremony, something impossible happened. Every biomechanical system on the ship began to vibrate with a frequency that felt wrong, in ways the War Prince could not understand. Far below on Earth's surface, Helen Yazzie placed her hands on the great drum and began the rhythm that would save two worlds. Around her, the underground chamber filled with harmonics that resonated through crystalline networks spanning the globe. "Begin the great healing," she said in Navajo, and her words were translated instantly into dozens of languages as indigenous communities worldwide received the signal they had been waiting for. In Australia, Aboriginal elders activated songlines that had been carved into crystal matrices over months of careful preparation. The ancient patterns began broadcasting frequencies that traveled through the Earth's crust itself, using the planet as a massive resonating chamber. In New Zealand, Maori warriors performed a haka that incorporated sonic weapons disguised as traditional instruments. Their war dance generated acoustic patterns that rose through the atmosphere and into space, carrying the message that Earth would not surrender its children. In the Arctic, Inuit weather workers released electromagnetic storms that they had been building in the polar ice for weeks. The aurora borealis exploded across the sky with unnatural colors as concentrated energy beams reached toward the alien fleet. Billy monitored the global network from his position at the Navajo Quantum Communication Center, watching as indicators showed indigenous communities around the world joining their voices to the planetary song. "All nodes are active," he reported. "The harmonic field is building to critical levels." On the Zephyrian mothership, Kethmar staggered as the ship's biomechanical systems began fighting against each other. The organic components were trying to separate from the mechanical ones, responding to frequencies that called them back to their natural state. "What is happening?" he demanded of his technicians. "Unknown interference from the planet's surface," one of them replied, his voice filled with confusion. "The biomechanical interfaces are destabilizing across the entire fleet." Maria sat in the modified Navajo aircraft that Billy had equipped with harmonic amplifiers, watching as the alien ships in orbit began to show signs of distress. The vessels were beautiful in their own way, but she could see that their beauty came from forcing living tissue to merge with machinery in ways that violated the natural order. "It's working," she reported through the quantum communication link. "The ships are losing cohesion." Helen's drumming intensified, and the rhythm was picked up by traditional drummers in communities around the world. The planet itself became a massive instrument, generating frequencies that reached into space and touched the core of every Zephyrian vessel. On the mothership, the War Prince watched in horror as his fleet began to fall apart around him, but it was not violent destruction. Instead, the ships were gently separating into their component parts. Organic and mechanical systems peacefully divorcing after centuries of forced union. "This is impossible," Kethmar said, but his voice lacked conviction. Deep in his genetic memory, something was responding to the healing frequencies from Earth. His own biomechanical implants were beginning to feel uncomfortable, like clothing that no longer fit properly. The young girl who had been chosen as Earth's offering looked around in wonder as the alien technology failed harmlessly around her. The scanning device that had been about to bind her to the War Prince simply stopped working, its organic and mechanical components separating into two distinct but non-functional pieces. Billy's voice came through the communication network, calm and steady despite the magnitude of what they were accomplishing. Phase 2 is complete. The Zephyrian fleet is effectively disabled. Beginning Phase 3. Phase 3 was the most ambitious part of the plan. Instead of simply defending Earth, the indigenous coalition was offering the Zephyrians something they had never encountered before: genuine healing. The harmonic frequencies that had disabled the alien ships began to change, becoming more complex and nurturing. Where before they had encouraged separation, now they offered integration based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced domination. Kethmar felt the change immediately. His biomechanical implants, instead of trying to separate from his organic body, began to work with it in ways he had never experienced. For the first time in his adult life, he felt truly comfortable in his own enhanced flesh. "What are you doing to us?" he asked, broadcasting his question toward Earth on all communication frequencies. Helen answered him directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who spoke for the planet itself. "We are showing you what your technology could become if you stopped fighting against the natural order and learned to work with it instead." The War Prince looked around his ship and saw his crew experiencing the same transformation. Zephyrians who had lived with constant low-level pain from their biomechanical implants were suddenly free of discomfort. Technology that had required constant maintenance to prevent rejection was now functioning smoothly and efficiently. "This is not possible," he said, but with wonder rather than denial. "Biomechanical fusion requires force to maintain stability." "No," Billy's voice replied through the communication system. "Biomechanical fusion requires harmony. You've been doing it wrong for thousands of years." Maria piloted her modified aircraft closer to the mothership, using the harmonic amplifiers to project healing frequencies directly at the alien vessel. She could see through the transparent sections of the hull that the Zephyrians inside were not suffering. Instead, they looked healthier and more peaceful than she had ever seen them. "Your empire was built on a false premise," Helen's voice continued. "You believed that different forms of life could only work together through domination and control. But indigenous peoples on Earth have always known that the strongest partnerships come from mutual respect and voluntary cooperation." Mar touched his chest where his biomechanical heart had been causing him pain for decades. The discomfort was completely gone, replaced by a sense of wholeness he had not felt since childhood. "How do we learn this harmony you speak of?" he asked. Joseph Biguet's voice joined the conversation, speaking with the dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime leading his people through difficult times. "You learn by remembering that you are part of something larger than yourself. You learn by listening to the songs that all living things sing when they are in balance." Around the Earth, indigenous communities continued their healing work, sending frequencies of restoration and balance toward the disabled Zephyrian fleet. Ships that had been weapons of conquest were being transformed into vessels of exploration and cooperation. The young girl who had been brought as a sacrifice looked up at the War Prince with curiosity rather than fear. "Are you feeling better now?" she asked in the simple directness that only children possess. Kethmar knelt down to her level, his movements more graceful than they had been in centuries. "Yes, little one. I think we all are." 3 months after the Great Healing, delegates from across the galaxy gathered on Earth for the first Galactic Harmony Council. The meeting took place not in some grand government building, but in a circle of traditional hogans on the Navajo reservation, where everything had begun. Maria Santos sat between Billy Yazzie and his grandmother Helen, watching as beings from dozens of worlds learned to participate in a talking circle, guided by indigenous protocols that were older than most of their civilizations. The Zephyrian delegation, led by Kethmar himself, listened with the patience of students rather than the arrogance of conquerors. "Before we came to Earth, We believed that strength meant the ability to force others to serve our will, Kethmar said when his turn to speak arrived. We measured success by how many worlds we controlled and how much fear we could inspire. The War Prince looked healthier than Maria had ever seen him. His biomechanical implants now worked in perfect harmony with his organic body, no longer causing the constant pain that had driven him to seek relief through domination of others. The Earth Children taught us that true strength comes from the ability to help others become their best selves, he continued. They showed us that cooperation creates more power than conquest ever could. Helen nodded with the satisfaction of a teacher whose students had finally understood an important lesson. The old ways are not primitive, she said. They are sophisticated approaches to problems that the young cultures have not yet learned to solve. Billy activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Worlds that had been under Zephyrian occupation were now free but not abandoned. Instead of being ruled by force, they were being guided toward their own forms of technological and social development, with advice and support from both Zephyrian healers and Earth's indigenous communities. The biomechanical technology that we used as weapons has been transformed into healing tools, a Zephyrian technician reported. Our ships now serve as mobile hospitals and research stations. We are learning to cure diseases and repair environmental damage instead of creating more destruction. Maria thought about how much her own life had changed since that terrible day when she was left to die in the desert. She was no longer Captain Santos of the Earth Space Force. Now she served as an ambassador between the old human governments and the new galactic community that was emerging. The most difficult part has been convincing Earth's traditional power structures that they need to change their approach, she said when her turn came to speak. Many world leaders still think in terms of competition and dominance rather than cooperation and balance. Joseph Begay, who had been chosen as Earth's primary representative to the Galactic Harmony Council, leaned forward with the diplomatic skills that had served his people well in decades of negotiations with the United States government. Change is always difficult for those who have benefited from the old ways, he observed. But even the most stubborn leaders are beginning to understand that indigenous knowledge offers solutions to problems they cannot solve with force or money. The meeting was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger who brought news that made everyone smile. The young girl who had been chosen as the second sacrificial bride had just graduated from her first year of studies at the new Galactic Harmony Institute, where beings from across the galaxy learned indigenous approaches to science, governance, and conflict resolution. She wants to become an ambassador like Maria, the messenger reported. She says that almost being sacrificed to aliens taught her that she wants to spend her life making sure no one else ever has to go through something like that. Billy laughed with genuine pleasure. She'll make an excellent ambassador. It takes someone who has faced real fear to understand the importance of creating genuine safety for others. As the day wore on, the delegates shared reports from their home worlds. The changes were remarkable and widespread. Planets that had been strip-mined for resources were being restored using biomechanical healing technology, guided by indigenous ecological principles. Species that had been at war for generations were learning to resolve conflicts through talking circles and consensus building rather than violence. The most surprising development has been the response from worlds that were never part of the Zephyrian Empire, reported a delegate from the Andromedan Coalition. They are requesting teachers and advisors who can help them learn these harmony-based approaches to technology and governance. Helen smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had lived long enough to see prophecy fulfilled. The old stories told us that when the Star People came, the Earth Children would either save the galaxy or watch it destroy itself. I am glad we chose the path of salvation. As the sun began to set over the desert landscape, the delegates prepared for the evening ceremony that would conclude their gathering. Traditional singers from various Earth cultures would perform alongside Zephyrian musicians and artists from other worlds, creating harmonies that had never existed before. Maria found herself standing next to Kethmar as they watched the preparations. The former War Prince had become one of the most effective advocates for the new galactic order, using his intimate knowledge of conquest-based thinking to help other species transition to cooperation-based approaches. Do you ever regret what happened? She asked him. The end of your empire, the loss of your power over other worlds? Kethmar considered the question seriously before answering. I regret the pain that my people caused while we were lost in the darkness of domination, he said. But I cannot regret finding our way to the light of true strength. The empire we are building now is far greater than anything we achieved through force. Billy joined them, carrying a traditional flute that had been modified with biomechanical enhancements, developed through the collaboration between Earth and Zephyrian technologies. When he played it, the music seemed to reach directly into the listener's soul, creating feelings of peace and connection that transcended species boundaries. The children being born now will grow up in a galaxy where cooperation is normal and conquest is seen as a primitive relic of the past, he said as he lowered the instrument. They will never know what it feels like to live in fear of being dominated or enslaved. Helen approached the group, moving with the energy of someone who had found her life's purpose. The circle is complete, she announced. The Star People came with fire to burn the world, but the Earth Children stood between destruction and salvation. Now the Star People and the Earth Children worked together to heal the galaxy. As the evening ceremony began, voices from dozens of worlds joined together in songs that celebrated the end of one age and the beginning of another. The music rose into the desert night, carrying messages of hope and healing to every corner of the galaxy. Maria looked up at the stars and thought about how different they looked now. Instead of cold points of light in an empty void, they were homes for friends and allies who shared a common commitment to protecting and nurturing all forms of life. The young Navajo who had asked if God had sent her to his people had unknowingly spoken prophecy. She had indeed been sent not as a sacrifice to appease alien conquerors, but as a bridge between worlds that were ready to learn from each other. The virgin bride who had been left to die in the blazing desert had become the first ambassador to a galactic community built on principles that indigenous peoples had preserved for thousands of years. And in saving herself, she had helped save the galaxy from a darkness that had lasted far too long. The healing was just beginning. But already the universe was singing with voices that had learned to work in harmony, rather than fight for dominance. The Earth Children had kept their promise to stand between destruction and salvation, and the Star People had proven that even the most lost could find their way home to the light.